Well, welcome to the 700 Club. The Democrats are hanging a lot on this so-called Mueller investigation. Let's not interfere with the Mueller investigation. Well, the time is that investigation apparently is coming to the end. And these are the words from President Trump's lawyers. Attorney Jay Sekulow gave this statement, quote, "The president has answered today written questions submitted by the special counsel's office. The questions presented dealt with issues regarding the Russia-related topics of the inquiry. The president responded in writing. Attorney Rudy Giuliani said this, quote, "It has been our position from the onset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation. The special counsel has been provided with more than 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages of material, and now the president's written responses to questions. It's time to bring this inquiry to a conclusion." And folks, I am certain that this is true. Where did it start? It started from a phony British intelligence agent who had something called Fusion GPS, which it turned out it was funded by the Democrat campaign. The whole thing is a hoax. There should never have been a special counsel. And it's now the two attorneys have said enough already. And I think we can take that to the bank. They're not going to help Mueller anymore. And by the way, Mueller used to work for Rudy Giuliani way back when. Well, there's been a massive fallout in tech stocks, and it's fueling a market drop. John Jessup has more on that story from CBN News Bureau.
That's right, Pat. The Dow took a 551-point nosedive Tuesday. Tech stocks were hit hardest over fears of a looming trade war between the United States and China. Still, as Charlene Aaron reports, the president's chief economic advisor says there's no need for concern.
Stocks plummeted across the board Tuesday, dropping 551 points, wiping out all the gains the market made in 2018. Tech stocks led the drop-off, and it filtered through the rest of the market. Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google's parent company Alphabet were all down Tuesday. Those companies losing a combined $822 billion in market value since August.
Technology companies are down again today. Oil prices are falling again. Today we also have weak results from a couple of different retailers.
National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow told reporters he isn't worried.
You got roughly a month left in them, so we'll see how the year ends. I will say, as it did earlier, economy is very sound.
Observers say global fears of a U.S. trade war with China are fueling the market's drop. The two countries have raised tariffs on billions of dollars of each other's goods in a fight over China's technology policy.
There was hope for a lot of this year that the U.S. and China were going to work out their problems without too much difficulty. And now, with the possibility of a lot of tariffs rising at the beginning of next year, people are concerned that this is actually going to drag on a lot longer, that it might have a pronounced effect on the global economy.
Oil and gas stocks also took a hit. Oil prices tumbled another 6.6% as Wall Street reacted to rising oil supplies. Some say this indicates an increased risk of recession, but Kudlow says the economy is strong.
Keep the faith. It's a very strong economy. Recession is so far in the distance, I can't see it.
Meanwhile, President Trump blames the Fed for raising interest rates and putting a drag on economic growth. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. Pat, do you agree with Larry Kudlow's assessment? No need to worry here?
No, I hesitate to go against anybody as distinguished as Larry, but I really believe we've got some problems. You know, the trouble with the stock market, very simply, there was so-called FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. I mean, these were the leaders, and they got way out of hand. They have gone way beyond what they should have, and people got so giddy about them, and they kept going up, 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 so they, you know, like trees don't go to the sky. And the time had come when the Fed turned the levers and started raising interest rates. The stock market always responds. And it dropped, and it has continued to drop. Well, what is long range? The United States dollar is the strongest currency in the world, far and away above anything else. And so after this little turmoil is over, people are going to say, well, we really need to get into dollar-denominated assets because the assets of the EU, the assets of the third world are just not as good. The currencies aren't as good. So they're going to begin to look, say, what are the most solid United States corporations? And they're going to start turning to utilities, they'll start turning to defense, and perhaps to health care. And so there's certain sectors that are going to go up nicely. The oil has surprised us all, but it has dropped dramatically, and I don't think there's any manipulation on it. But I do think, for example, there's one stock that I am very pleased to say I have obtained a number of shares. It's called NextEra Energy. It owns a regulated utility, Florida Power and Light down in Florida. It's a regulated utility. Plus, they own probably the best collection of wind and solar companies in the world. So the two together make a real nice combination, and the stuff's going up. So, you know.
All those gains that we made. Bye-bye.
Well, I wasn't in any of those gains, so I missed it. But I like something a little bit different. But it was too frothy, you know. When it gets that way, you're going to have a sell-off. But I do think what I said is going to happen. The dollar is going to ride strong in the next several years. And third world stocks, the emerging market, are going to go in the tank. And people are going to say, let's get our money and put it into the best American corporations. So that's where you ought to be, not speculative, not in these little things, and not on these high PE stocks, which are just way, way oversold. John.
Well, Pat, senators on both sides of the aisle want the president to share who he believes is responsible for the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Republican Senator Bob Corker and Democrat Robert Menendez, who lead the Foreign Relations Committee, sent a letter to the president Tuesday night. It came in response to the president saying the U.S. might never know who ordered the killing and won't impose any more sanctions on the country or its leaders. The president called the killing a horrible crime, but insisted Saudi Arabia is an important regional and economic ally.
Because it's America first to me. Saudi Arabia, if we broke with them, I think your oil prices would go through the roof.
U.S. intelligence officials have said they believe the Saudi crown prince was involved in Khashoggi's killing. President Trump said the crown prince and the king strongly deny it. The U.S. has sanctioned 17 Saudi officials suspected of being complicit in the murder. And Pat, critics say those sanctions just aren't enough.
You know, I really love our president. I appreciate what he's done. But he is allying himself with one of the most vicious thugs on the planet. This Mohammed bin Faisal, bin Salman, is really turning into a vicious dictator. There is no question that he turned those people loose on Khashoggi. There's no doubt about it. Our own CIA is saying that's what happened. The Turks are saying that's what happened. The tapes are indicating that's what happened. And the idea that they would execute some of the people who were merely doing the prince's bidding, he's the guy that locked up his fellow princes. Now, you remember when the whole country of Saudi Arabia was getting formed, there was Saud, and they named, he was an Arab, and they named Arabia after Saud, the House of Saud. And he had a number of sons that we got to know along the way, and one was Faisal and various ones. And they, in turn, took their places. Then they've had sons, and then the sons have had sons. But they're all princes. They've got dozens of the princes over there. And this one guy doesn't have to be the one that we turn to. There's nothing in the world that says we can't sanction Mohammed bin Salman. And get him out of the way, and it won't affect our relation with Saudi Arabia at all. As a matter of fact, his brothers will be delighted to see him go. He's the guy that locked up his brothers in a hotel and extorted hundreds of billions of dollars out of their wealth. And he is a vicious, vicious dictator. And he's turning Saudi Arabia into a police state. And we cannot ally ourselves with him. So I hope our dear president will open his eyes and say, this one man is not responsible, will not affect the oil coming out of Saudi Arabia one iota. John.
Pat, turning now to our southern border, where Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen toured the wall in Southern California Tuesday. Border Patrol and troops installed new razor wire along the wall in preparation for the migrant caravan making its way through Mexico. Nielsen says some 6,200 of the 10,000-strong caravan is already in Tijuana, adding that they have a strategy for entering the United States illegally.
Organizers of the caravan have been pushing women and children and others to the front of the caravan in hope that law enforcement will not engage them. This is particularly dangerous given the unusual propensity for violence we have seen in this caravan.
Monday, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's order barring asylum to people who enter the U.S. illegally. Well, the White House fight with CNN highlights the growing dissatisfaction with the media in America. CBS White House reporter Major Garrett tells CBN News the mainstream media has a credibility problem and needs to fix it. Our David Brody spoke to Garrett about the state of the media and his new book about the Trump administration.
It would be an understatement to say that President Trump's first 2 years has been a roller coaster. And that's why Major Garrett's new book pretty much sums it up with the title, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride, the thrills, chills, screams, and occasional blackouts of an extraordinary presidency.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
A major driver of this ride has been the love-hate relationship between the White House and the mainstream media, or as President Trump calls them, fake news. Garrett says it's not just the president who has a problem with the media.
When the public is asking those of us who are frontline reporters who can they believe, they're essentially saying, we're not sure we can believe you. That's our problem of our creation. And we've got to own up to that, and we've got to reverse that trend line.
That's one reason the battle between CNN's Jim Acosta and the Trump administration over press passes and decorum has Garrett's attention.
I am, as what they say in the legal community, an interested party. Because I work there. I'm on the same front row that Jim Acosta is and that CNN is.
Garrett says it's a fight that Trump and CNN President Jeff Zucker want.
But I do think Jeff Zucker and Donald Trump want to have this fight on behalf of not just these serious and underlying legal questions, but on their own reputational relationship to one another.
This week, the White House laid out certain ground rules for reporters during press conferences. While Garrett sees himself as a neutral observer, he does believe the Trump administration has a good point.
The CNN position is also, to a certain degree, absolute, that there's no limits on the decorum in the White House. Well, I don't believe that as a reporter.
So there are limits.
I've exercised them.
Garrett explains an encounter during a Rose Garden event. He had the microphone in his hand, ready to ask a question, and then Trump said no and called on the reporter behind him.
Was I giving up my First Amendment rights? No. The president said, no, not you. It's his press conference.
That example is just one of many that keeps Garrett covering this wild ride. As a passenger, whether as a correspondent or author, he felt it was also his job to cover the ups and downs responsibly.
I'd covered 3 presidents before, and it felt to me as if the country was getting the impression that because this is so different and comes at us so differently, maybe the typical powers of the presidency don't still exist. Well, they do. And maybe things aren't getting done. They are.
Garrett's reporting style follows the just the facts trademark, and his book follows that example, recounting the issues with no dreaded anonymous sources.
Everyone's quoted by name. Everyone is quoted by their title and by what they saw and what they saw happening.
Purposeful.
Purposeful.
There are books about Trump written for the pro-Trump crowd. There are books written for the anti-Trump crowd.
Yes.
This book is written for fill in the blank.
I've told my best friends as I was writing the book, my greatest fear is that it will not love the president enough and it will not hate the president enough.
You are terrible.
That is not
you are really
You don't mean that. You don't mean that.
No, I do mean it.
And as Trump runs the country, Garrett will continue to report on one of the most important times in political history.
We had 113 million Americans participate in the midterms. 49.2% participation rate, higher than any year since 1966. This country cares about this time politically, and we're sorting it out.
Garrett hopes voters will look to his book that tries to do just that, sort it all out in a fair and honest way. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, David. Pat, that about sums it up. Mr. Trump's wild ride.
It's been very interesting. You know, it's been said what they ought to do is just turn Jim Acosta loose and say, all right, Jim, it's your question, and you want to follow up? Yes. Well, you want another follow-up? Absolutely. And he just keeps running his mouth, and every other reporter in the room is seething with anger, and before long, the press will turn on this boorish individual and say, enough already, we've had enough. The other thing that Trump has said he can do, and he certainly can anytime he wants to, he can just walk out. Thank you, gentlemen. The press conference is over. I'm leaving. Thank you very much. Mr. Acosta has the floor, and you can ask him any question you want to. But this guy has, in my opinion, exceeded the bounds of propriety. We need to treat the president of who represents all of us with respect and dignity. He holds the highest office in our land, and he is deserving of respect. And if he's not, you shouldn't be covering him, and you shouldn't be allowed a press pass. And I'm not sure that this thing, what they're doing now is setting up rules. Do you understand what they're doing? I think that's it.
I'm not sure. I just know when I was watching the videotape of Jim Acosta, and the thing that was offensive to me, maybe even as a female, was just sort of how he karate chopped. He sort of used physical force, you know, to get the mic. And I just thought that was so unappealing and definitely worthy of him being kicked out.
With all due deference, I think CNN is a nothing. I don't think they're all very credible at all. I mean, they don't have that big an audience, and they're diminishing in audience responsibility. And, you know, it was built, well, in the early days. I won't go into all that. I know a lot about the early days, but it was a joke in terms of news. And now they have lost out very clearly to Fox and other channels. So in any event, but he's trying to bully his way. And people in this country just don't like a loudmouth. They really don't like a loudmouth bully. And that he's just trying to get attention.
Yeah, well, I liked what Major Garrett said.
Yeah, well, Major Garrett is right. Yeah. Good book, Major. I hope a lot of people read it. John?
Pat, more Americans are traveling this Thanksgiving holiday, and that's thanks to low gas prices. Some 48 million people are expected to be on the roads. Another 3 million predicted to travel by plane. In some areas of the Northeast, snow and rain could snarl traffic, and temperatures on Thanksgiving Day will hit near record lows, dropping down to the low 20s in some places. Joe Bastardi of Weather Bell Analytics told CBN News steady winds will make it feel even colder. He also predicted stormy winter weather will kick in as the weekend comes to a close.
The wind chills of this are going to be below zero during the day Thursday. The wind chills of 5 to 10 degrees for the Macy's Day Parade. I do think there's a chance that we see a blizzard, though. Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Sunday into Sunday night. So the end of the weekend out there gets real rough, and the pattern, once we get by Thanksgiving, at least through the opening 10 days of December, looks cold and stormy for much of the United States.
Joe did end, though, on a positive note, saying in days ahead, California will get enough rain to put an end to those wildfires. Welcome news for those Californians. Pat, back to you.
And the bad news, with the rains comes flooding. So
mudslides.
They can't mudslides. They can't win. But anyhow, Joe Bastardi called it right, and it's happening. But my, can you imagine those people in scanty costumes trying to get into that Macy's Day Parade when the wind chill may be in the zero single digits? Is horrible.
When I was 17, my first trip to New York was the Macy's Day Parade on a Thanksgiving, of course, and it was the coldest Thanksgiving. And it was fascinating, though, but it can get so cold because you're right on the water there in New York. And when that wind goes through those high rises and you're standing there and you're not fully dressed.
An unhappy little girl, or were you miserable?
Well, I was freezing, but thrilled. I'm a little girl from West Virginia, and all of a sudden I'm in New York City, so it was fascinating.